This is the sound of redemption. This is the way that we bring it down. Down, down, down. Down, down, down. Down, down, down. Down, down, down. Down, down. Igniting the fire within you. Exalting the melody of freedom. These are the things that will bring it down. Down, down, 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 down. So gather the faithful. Tell everyone to stand and shout loud. Shout loud. Shout loud. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it way down. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it down, down. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it way down. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it down, down. Down, down, down.
Let me tell you, it's in the air. Joy is in the air. Love is in the air. Can you feel it? What it feel like? Freedom. What it feel like? Don't sleep on it, brother. You might get left, sister. Can you feel it? What it feel like? Freedom. What it feel like? Justice. No need to be counted, cause I am down. Down, down, down. Down, down, down. Down for the end of racism, for the end of bigotry, cause I am down. For the end of misogyny, that's right. For all the isms out there, just down, down, down. Let's bring it down. Rise up, people. No more foolishness, and let's bring it way down.
Riding the river of change into the cries of contrition. This is the way that we bring it down. Down, down, 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 down. We are the children of Eden, dancing and celebrating freedom. We are the ones that must bring it down. Down, down, 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 down. So gather the faithful. Tell everyone to stand and shout loud. Shout loud. Shout loud. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it way down. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it down, down. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it way down. Let's bring it down. We've got to bring it down. Down. Stand up and shout. Stand up and shout. Rise together.
Accountability starts now. The Eric Dawson Radio Show.
Yeah. Rise up. Stand up, shouting loud.
If you are not prepared to come to that table and to represent that voice, don't come. Because we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need Muslims that don't want to be a Muslim voice. We don't need queers that don't want to be a queer voice. And if you're worried about being marginalized and stereotyped, please don't even show up.
There's only one way to be independent. There's only one one way to be free. It's not something that someone gives to you. It's something that you take. Nobody can give you independence. Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you equality or justice or anything. If you're a man, you take it. If you can't take it, you don't deserve it. Nobody can give it to you. I'm for anybody who's for freedom. I'm for anybody who's for justice. I'm for anybody who's for equality. I'm not for anybody who tells me to sit around and wait for mine.
Good morning, folks. Hey, Diane. Well, firstly, good morning, everybody. Hit the share button. We're live. This is the Eric Dawson Radio Show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Those who are self-quarantined, welcome. Right? We're in social distancing, right? None of us are touching each other, but we're able to communicate, which is great. I have Diane Murray Clemens, the queen of the show, on the air. And we got a whole lot to talk about today. But one of the things that I want to do, Diane, if we could figure out, and maybe starting tomorrow, I'll put up a calendar so it says day whatever of the coronavirus crises, right? And we can keep track of some data like that, like how many days, where we are. I just think it's important, right? Because people get disoriented at some point. We just kind of in this thing and it's happening. But to stay oriented in terms of how far along we are in it and what progress we've made, so that people hopefully at some point can see the light at the end of the tunnel that won't be a train coming toward them would be a cool thing.
Good morning. I think that's a great idea. It kind of reminds me of, what was that, the Twilight Zone, when they used to do stuff like that in their different segments and scenes and stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're living in the Twilight Zone.
It is crazy. And then the other thing I want to do is up top here where I have your ad, and then even down at the bottom third, we'll redesign all of this artwork to provide pertinent information, right? Like emergency numbers to call, things that people should do. I want to start making sure that we're posting the kind of symptoms that people should be looking out for. And then the other thing that I want to do, Diane, we talked a little bit about this off air. We've been battling in terms of holding accountable these local elected officials, right? And a lot of them have, kind of waged war against us too, right? In the fact that they dislike the fact that we continue to shine a light on their misfeasance and malfeasance. But there are opportunities for us to come together in some things that are going on. And for us to share information. We do have a platform, and they know that it is a viable platform. And so what I'd like to do right now is reach out to them and say, look, along with whatever else you're doing to provide information, what we do know is that everybody's not getting the information. Like Donna Jackson, who said that she was at a store and people still didn't know that there was a curfew, right? And so it is incumbent upon you to put your ego aside now, guys. Get out of your feelings and share information with us that we can share with our audience. We're asking you to do that. You still disagree on some other things, but we could get back to those things later. Right now, put your big boy pants on, put your big girl skirt on or dress or pants, whatever you wear. And let's be about the business of unifying around this issue, right? So we are a platform. We do have an audience. There are folks who are trying to get information. We want to be able to share accurate information, truthful information about how people can remain safe, how people can participate in helping to lower the spread. So we're imploring you to share the information with us.
Absolutely.
How'd I do?
Yeah. I think you could put aside your ego and just call them by name. Mayor whomever. Give us a call. Mayor whoever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so give us a call, guys. Your health departments can let us know what's going on. Let our audience know what's going on, right? So you can do that, right? Can you, right? That's leadership, right? That's
See, wait. You can't extend the hand and then pull it halfway back.
See, that's I said I did a good
the hand
job,
and
right?
Let it go.
Let it go. Okay.
Yeah, let it go. It's an open
I let go.
platform. You're welcome to come. Whoever the mayor, council person, health
Is this like an
department.
altar call, Diane?
It's like an altar call. All are welcome. All are welcome.
All are welcome. All right. Well, I see, Diane. That's why I love you. That because you keep me tempered, right? So anyway, we got a lot to go over. You got elected officials down in Washington dumping millions of dollars in stock. The question is, did they know ahead of time what was going on? Did they get some insider information? Remember, I told you that you have all of these lobbyists who work for these, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry or other industries, and were they sharing information that, kind of compelled elected officials down there, senators and congressmen and women, to dump stock?
Absolutely. I believe they were sharing information. They got insider trade information, and we should treat them the same way that we did. What was the white woman, the cook, Martha Stewart? The same way we did Martha Stewart. They should be tried once this is over, and they should be convicted. They all got insider information. One particular senator was dumping like $1.2 million worth of trade.
Yeah, another one was here's a headline out of Apple News. It says, Richard Burr, some other senators sold lots of stock as virus fears started. Says Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr. So now he's part of the Intelligence Committee too. So this guy has information, right? So anyway, Diane, pull me off. Sold as much as $1.7 million in stock just before the market dropped in February.
Mm-hmm.
Go to jail. Got to go to jail.
Go straight to jail.
Don't not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Straight to jail. Because what we know as facts is the United States government knew from December about this outbreak. So he knew in December, all the way up to February, he's watching the stock market go up and down and down and down till it hit February, when he used his insider information to save his own skin. And that's not right.
And it goes further to say several other senators sold big stock stake around the same time, Senate records reveal. The documents show that Ben and his wife sold between roughly $600,000 and $1.7 million in 33 separate transactions in late January and mid-February, just before the market began to fall and as government health officials began to issue stark warnings about the effects of the virus. All of the stocks were in companies that own hotels.
Yep, and who do you think also benefits from that? Number 45.
Come
he
on
benefited
now.
from that as well.
Burr's stock sales were first reported by ProPublica and the Center for Responsive Politics. Most of them came on February 13th, just before Burr made a speech in his home state in which he predicted severe consequences from the virus, including closed schools and cutbacks in company travel. Hotels. According to audio obtained by National Public Radio and released Thursday. Right? Now, we can go further in this thing, but what I'm saying to you guys is this. There needs to be a full and thorough investigation because they're talking here about a Republican senator. But there are also reports that Democrats who were senators and congressmen and women were also dumping stocks. So when we saw the market plummeting, right, we saw that going down. You know, it was a direct result of what?
Inside information.
Inside information.
Which helped with the crash. Everybody knows, and they pull their money out. Of course the stocks are going to drop drastically. It's not right. So they should all be investigated. It should be a separate committee for them. And some people from the from the community need to be on that committee, and they need to go. And if they don't have an investigation, people need to not forget this. And when it's time to vote, vote them out. Vote for whoever against them. Whoever.
So I would look at all of them. I'm telling you. Look at all of them, guys. So if you were looking for litmus tests, right? Things that you should be looking for to determine that your government doesn't work for you, that those who are elected don't work for you, that they're all conspiring constantly against you, right? That you are the commodity to their wealth. If you're looking for ways to identify that, here is one. Where they say, one man's garbage is another man's treasure, right? You heard that saying? So they're looking now and saying, you know what? How do we capitalize on American people? Again. How do we benefit from their suffering? Again. And here's a way that they're looking to do it. So withholding some information, maybe, in order for them to be able to dump their stocks, for them to put themselves in a good financial situation before the information got released, generally. See, those are the places that we should start looking for conspiracies, because conspiracies always happen around the power grab in terms of economics and in terms of politics, right? So we should be looking at all of that kind of stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, the other thing that I heard, Diane, and I thought about this, well, there are two things. One, there is a rush on gun permits. We in the show today, I'm putting on my mask and I'm going to register for a permit. I'm not even joking.
Well, you do know how long it takes to get a permit, right?
I don't care. But if I don't start today, right, each day that I wait, it's going to take that much longer.
This is true.
Right? So I'm gonna go and we're gonna file for a gun permit. There is a rush and a rash of people going out, getting permits and getting guns.
Well, that's fear driven. Why do you think that is? Why guns?
Well, because people don't know what's going to happen, right? So, and I want to say this before we go further. We've been having some challenges with broadcasting on Facebook and on YouTube. And I don't know at this point which one is the best, guys, but we're going to do our best here. But I did get an alert that came through my computer, or came through my through my computer earlier, and I want you guys to take heed to this, because this is actually happening. So I went to set up the show this morning, and it came up and it said, "Good morning, Eric. Thanks for signing in. I want to let you know that we are facing some issues with YouTube API integration because of the sudden surge in traffic. We ran out of YouTube API limits, right? Which gets allocated to us per day, and that is causing the issue. We contacted YouTube for increasing the allocated quota for API calls, and we are waiting for a response. With what's happening in the world now, we are not sure when we will get a response from them. You will still be able to stream to YouTube by manually configuring YouTube using StreamKey." So there is right now, because more and more people are being quarantined, more people are home, bandwidth is being choked, folks are trying to figure out how to get on, and I suspect, Diane, that it's just going to get worse, right? That, you know, we're going to get to a point, and we talked about the need for independent media. We talked about how bandwidth is allocated, what algorithms do. And right now, trust and believe that all of these tech companies, whether you're talking about Google, who's being overrun right now with data, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all of them are going to have to make decisions about what information they're going to be sharing and what information they're not, because the information highway, the internet, just cannot handle the bandwidth. It's almost like in the summer, you know, when everybody turns their air conditioners on, and then we're surge and then, things go out, right? It's because the breakers are not set to handle that. And that's why they tell you turn your air conditioner down or turn it off and open your windows if you can. And that thing is happening right now. So everybody is going to the internet.
Right.
And it's
well, the
not
other
set
thing
to
that's also happening with Facebook, I know, I got a message from them last night and this morning that their community standards on spam, and then they gave me a notice that they spammed some of the information that I put out and then reposted it and said that they were sorry that they got it wrong and that it does follow the community standards. So a lot of other things are happening as well too. So they're spamming articles that are in regards to coronavirus.
Yeah. Yeah.
To make sure I would say to make sure that pertinent, relevant, truthful information is coming out. Mm-hmm. But you got other IT people on the other side, and IT people only know IT stuff. They don't really delve into other industries of knowledge and stuff like that. So whatever they assume on their side is not a community standard for Facebook, they're taking it down. And I guess other people are then looking at it and saying, no, this is fine, and reposting it again. So that's kind of what's happening too.
So back to my gun, or my permit to get a gun, because I don't have a gun yet. But don't come for me, because I got a bat.
You got a bat?
Until I get a gun, I got a bat. Everybody bats.
Have a bat.
I got several bats. I got a machete. I got some stuff. So, but anyway, one of the other reasons I think that there's a run on permits, Diane, gun permits, is because what's going to happen as more and more law enforcement folks contract the coronavirus. So in New York, they have 4 officers, I think, right now that that have tested positive for it, and so now they've self-quarantined, right, or whatever they're doing to take care of them. But now they have to go and test all of the officers within that department, and I'm guaranteeing you that somebody else within that department or those departments is infected as well, right? So as that starts to, trickle down through police departments, and so now you got to remove these officers from the street, right, from protecting and serving, that means that you have fewer there.
Well, that's not necessarily going to happen
sure?
that. So what'll happen is, because you also have to remember, you have a lot of people law enforcement people that are retired. They'll just call back some of those officers to replace. Because, for instance, in our town, when we needed people to do traffic officers, we called back some of the retirees to handle that, because they know the laws, they know how to deal with the public. We don't have to train them as a new officer.
Okay.
So they'll pull back some of the retirees. They'll pull in correction officers if necessary, because correction officers also have the same bona fides as the police officers. So I wouldn't be so worried about that. The thing is, I'd be more concerned with the fact that they're out there, and because they're dealing with so many people, that they are more susceptible to getting stuff. I know I was reading in the paper also that many municipalities here in the state of New Jersey have been recorded to give at least 90% less traffic tickets, because they're not trying to infect themselves and or others and or go after minor stuff, because more stuff is more important right now than parking tickets and stuff like that. And several towns have eliminated, have relaxed the parking ticket case as well.
Well, I want to let criminals know that committing a crime, right, and expecting that a police officer is not going to arrest you because of social distancing is not going to happen.
Yeah, that's
like, can you imagine, Diane? I'm like, you know what? I robbed a bank, but I might be contagious, so don't touch me. Keep your distance. It's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. And for one, when you get in the court system, you're going to be sitting there a long time.
That's right, because they're delaying all of that stuff.
The criminal court system has been shut down.
Yeah.
So who knows how long you'll be sitting there. Go figure. But you're talking about the internet and, overuse of stuff, and everybody's on it. Did you see the article I sent you about now Pornhub has now exasperated their number of membership, and they're also giving out like free membership to some people as well, because everybody's on it now?
Hey, listen. See, All right, I want to say, well, a couple things. One man's trash is another man's treasure, right? So right now, Pornhub, and I talked about reinventing yourself, or I talked about ingenuity and creativity, and so now Pornhub looks and says, wait, we got a captive audience now. You got these people who are stuck in the house trying to figure out something to do, twiddling their fingers or something else, and so we're gonna hey, listen. But you know what it also says? See, for all of the stuck-up people, Diane, who pretend to be prudes, right? When you see that the pornographic industry is like a $6 billion or $8 billion industry, right? But then when you get, and I'm gonna tell you this too, if you go and look at the data in terms of what people watch on Pornhub and other things, you'd be shocked. They're not watching heterosexual sex. A lot of them are watching the kinkiest stuff that you can imagine, right? Meanwhile, when you get a guy like Andrew Gilliam who gets caught in a hotel room, everybody goes, oh my God, can you believe that he was with a male escort? And I'm going, well, wait a minute. But if we look at data, right, and we look at what most people who are on these porn sites are looking at, right? You know, listen, I remember when I worked in New York, there was a young lady who worked with me. Oh, what was the name of, there was a bar, and maybe somebody on here would know it, but there was a bar where there was a guy who would wear a saddle, like a real horse saddle, and
Oh my God.
and you could go and you could ride him, right?
Stop! I can't.
Diane, listen. I worked down in the Gramercy Park area for a long time, and you know, and I used to go down Wall Street, and I used to hang out with some of those guys. Listen, some of those guys who are trading stocks are some of the freakiest guys ever.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely believe it. That's like the guy, remember the naked cowboy that used to be up on 42nd Street all the time? So he used to be out there. He used to get a lot of money. But just so anybody who's interested, Pornhub is offering free premium memberships to countries that are on lockdown. So they're now offering a subscription that's normally $9.99 per month for $7.99 with a year-long package. The premium offers no ads, fast streaming, high-speed downloads, and higher video quality, full DVDs, discreet billing, and anytime cancellation.
So,
Absolutely no reason not to join.
Go get yours. And listen, they're not a sponsor of the show. We don't get any money for promoting it. But listen, you know, if you gotta go through this this coronavirus crisis, do it with a smile on your face.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Oh God.
We were talking the other day about businesses and marketing and stuff, and I sent you an article. I sent you two articles, but one was talking about the most valuable skill in difficult times is lateral thinking, and they were given some tips on, you know, on how to see things differently. And you kind of talked about that on picking a transitional object, not jumping to the wrong answer and stuff like that.
Right.
And so you talked about that.
Yeah. So part of the thing is, and again, you know, I recently started a business, and you know, I told you guys we're servicing the food industry, and as you know, the food industry is suffering big time right now, and we have lost probably 50% or more of our client base, and then, I mean, just straight out, right, just gone. And then the 50% that remains, their orders have dropped probably 30%, right? So out of the 50% that remains, we're only getting 70% of the orders filled there, and a lot of uncertainty about whether or not they're going to be closing as well. So we have to try to figure out, even within our own company, how to manage that. And I'm trying to. I think Diane disconnected, but she'll call back. I'm trying to work with my my clients to get through this. Some of them won't be able to because some of them are sit-down restaurants. So here's the deal. If you are a sit-down restaurant, this is what I said to them, and you're now trying to convert to become a takeout restaurant, that's going to be challenging because people are habitual, right? So your customers have formed a habit. You've marketed yourself to them successfully as a place where they could come and sit down and relax and enjoy a meal and the ambiance created for them. And so that's how they see your brand, right? And it's attached, no matter how good your food is, they see your food attached to the ambiance, attached to all of that. When they want to rush and they want to take out and they want to go home, there are other brands that have successfully marketed to them already. And now what you're trying to do is invade that space that those other businesses have been successful in creating. That's going to be a challenge for you to do. It's going to be almost impossible too, or you're going to have to spend a tremendous amount of money to get that done. So unfortunately, a lot of those businesses, Diane, what I would say to them is, if you recognize that, let's say, 20% of your business was takeout, but 80% of your business was dine in. Now you're trying to survive on 20%, and you might even get that 20% up to 40%, but that's still well below what you need to be able to survive. And it may be best for you to just kind of cut your losses for now, close. Unfortunately, your employees will be laid off, but you want to be able to live to fight another day. If you continue to stay open and bleed out your company, then the chances of you, coming back will be less, right? So,
Now, my daughter was telling me, because over in Brooklyn, what they were doing is with the takeout, they were allowing them to do buy a drink and take out. That's the only way that they were allowing them to do takeout at some restaurants. So apparently something is going on in Brooklyn where the only way...
Buy an alcoholic beverage?
Yep.
Well, I don't understand it, because if you're taking out, right, I don't... I don't know. I think that they... See, the question, there's a lot of questions here, and some of those, you got to be very, very careful. I don't know whether or not you're allowed to go in the restaurant. Right?
No, you're not. But in order for them to deliver, in order for them to provide delivery, you have to buy a drink to go with a meal.
But how are you buying an alcoholic beverage for delivery?
They are, and they're allowing them.
Wait a minute.
No.
I'm not suggesting that.
In a beer somewhere. I don't know. I guess they're bottling and sending it out. I don't know how they're doing it, but it's happening. She and her coworkers had to work yesterday, so they food, and she said it took them forever to call around to find places, because every place would not allow them to order unless they bought drinks with it, and they couldn't order drinks because they're paying on a company card.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is an alternative that can happen. I mean, why not be able to carry it and go?
Well, because this is going to be very interesting.
Think about it. I mean, it's already open, of course, but it would be no different if you were in a sports arena and you were carrying it with your food.
No, but the difference, Diane, is this.
In one location.
No, but Diane, here's the difference, right? You have some establishments that allow you to sell packaged drinks, right? So, like, I know there's a bar up on Springfield Avenue, I believe it's in Maplewood, that you can go in, you can sit down and you can have a drink at the bar, but you can also order a 6-pack to go, right? Every bar doesn't...
They got the same bar up on Main Street in Orange.
Right, but what I'm saying to you is this. But what I'm saying to you is this, that every bar doesn't have that permit, right? So every single bar you go into doesn't sell what they call packaged goods, right? You can have a sit-down drink, but you can't buy a drink to go. And so I'm now saying, how are they converting their liquor license into that packaged license? Do you understand what I'm saying? So they better be very, very careful because you just can't convert like that. I mean, my family owned a bar and lounge, and we didn't have a package license, so we wouldn't be able to sell you a beer to go. We wouldn't be able to sell you, like if you came in and said, hey, listen, I don't want to sit down and have something on a tap. Can I take a 6-pack to go? We wouldn't be able to sell you that. Are you following what I'm saying?
No, I totally understand.
Yeah.
I'm going to do some more research, but I'm going based on her experience that she had yesterday.
Oh no, I'm not saying that there's not lawlessness going on. I'm just saying that people ought to be very, very careful because the fines for that kind of stuff are extensive and can include you losing your liquor license. So I would just I would caution.
What did you just say? One man's trash
is another man's treasure.
There's gonna be a whole lot of liquor licenses up for sale after this.
You know what? There you go. Well, because people violated the law as well as businesses going out of business, right? So whether you're talking about the stock market or you're talking about, opportunities that might exist. Hey, listen, the other thing that exists too right now? The idea of partnering, right? Because cash is going to be at a premium for, some of these businesses. So as they start to falter a little bit, there may be opportunities to create, strategic partnerships, either equity partnerships or bartering or something, right? But
so we're talking about Dawson.
Any business,
bar.
listen,
Maybe
Diane, any business at this point.
For those people to partner.
I'm sorry?
I said maybe that's an opportunity for people to partner. Restaurants that don't have the package license to partner with a wine or beer establishment that does.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's time to be innovative. Right? Try to figure it out. Try to look at where holes are, right? SWOTs, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. What opportunities exist right now? You can't become so fixated on the tragedy of the coronavirus that you're not looking for ways to. And I'm not talking about surreptitious ways, right? Or but straightforward ways that you could benefit and provide a benefit for the community too.
So my next question is in regards to, and I know because you have a medical license, do they provide delivery? Is that allowed? That a part of
Did
license?
You say I have a medical license?
A medical marijuana license.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Listen, my mother watches the show. Diane, my mother watches the show. She'd be like, "You're a doctor?" You didn't tell me.
No, Mama, he ain't no doctor.
No. I play one on TV though. So.
No, but yeah, would medical dispensaries, are they allowed to deliver? Because I know there are, when they talk about the cannabis industry, and I know Gaetano, if you're listening, he may know this, that there are many ancillary businesses that work along with cannabis, such as delivery services. Because I know in California and Colorado, some of those businesses are making good money too.
Right. So but here's the difference with Colorado, Oregon, right, and other places like that. Recreational marijuana is legal, right? So the idea of delivery is different. When you're talking about medical marijuana, I'm not sure if in New Jersey the dispensaries are allowed to deliver, right? But I think that, or not legally allowed to deliver. But so I don't know the answer. But Gaetano, I'm sure he's tuned in. Hey, if you could answer that in the thread, that would be helpful for us. But Diane, I asked the question yesterday. I said, do you believe that the liquor store, home liquors, should be is an essential business?
You're gonna lose your listeners. You better be careful.
Yeah. Is it not just home liquor, right? But I guess in some of the urban communities, you got a liquor store in every third corner. Are they essential businesses, and should they be allowed to stay open as some of the other businesses are closing?
Yes, as long as kids are home from school, yes.
Hey, Diane, and they should be able to deliver, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, see, there we go.
There's some parents at home right now losing it. They have more respect for teachers than they've ever had before.
Yeah. So, so get your drink on.
Responsibly. Be responsible.
Gosh. Listen, Mnuchin just said that tax day has been postponed to July. So here's the deal.
The tax deadline?
Tax deadline has been postponed to July.
Yeah, it's postponed, but
Yeah, it just postponed, people.
look, the tax deadline is postponed. They ain't say those tax payments are postponed.
But Diane, here's the deal, though, right? Again, we got to look at how there's always a push and pull, a yin and yang, so to speak. So you had some businesses who were stocking up on flat screen TVs and everything, right? Because right about now, people are getting their tax refunds and they're running to buy these electronics, right? So there's been an outlay of cash over here to purchase these electronics, but now because tax day has been postponed to July, these people no longer have the cash because they bought the merchandise, right? And now they're paying warehousing fees, other kind of storage fees to store these televisions and other kinds of things until July.
That doesn't mean that the payout is delayed. Is that what he said? He said the filing date is delayed.
Well, let's see what it says.
Because everything doesn't always correspond with everything together.
So tax day postponed until July 15th, Mnuchin says. Tax day is being pushed back until July while the nation copes with the effects of coronavirus, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin announced Friday. It's moving to the 15th. All taxpayers and businesses will have this additional time to file without okay, so it's just for so
payments, yeah.
All right, so you can still get you'll still get your refund, I guess.
Well, some people get it electronically. It doesn't mean that it's going to move faster, but they'll still get it. But the other thing is, I would just check with irs.gov and find out to make sure, because for people who owe money and especially with tax payments, those tax payments, that interest keeps going. He didn't say anything about stopping those interests, that interest that's building up on those tax payments that you have to pay. And a lot of people pay back taxes. A lot of businesses too.
They just spend it all, Diane.
It's a ripple effect. Now the other thing is for small businesses, the SBA, that they're going to be providing financial assistance. And the financial assistance is going to be in the form of low interest loans. So whether you're a small business or a nonprofit business, they're providing low interest loans, which is, for some people, may be good. So like, for instance, I've talked to one person who's a dental hygienist. They could make about $90,000 a year. However, they're hourly. So the doctor of the dentist is looking to get a loan so he can float them for 2 weeks of paid sick time off, for 2 weeks off. But the thing is, for smaller businesses, not like a doctor that's bringing in buku dollars like they are, takes out a loan, how long will it take you, or will you ever be able to get out from under that loan? Because they're saying they can loan for 30 years for you. Yeah, so they extend a $10,000 or $15,000, $20,000 loan for you for 30 years. How much interest are you going to really pay on that loan? Because you're just making the minimum payments because you can, as opposed to paying it off. So this can be a win or lose for some businesses to jump into a loan that they know they can't afford to pay off. So it's a catch-22. So you have to be careful as to what you're borrowing the money for. Now, specifically for like beauticians, barbers, this might be something to help keep them afloat, to float their payroll for the next couple of months, which is a good thing. And then they just have to pay it back when they get back to working. So that could be a plus for them, especially if they have a storefront, they got overhead and stuff like that. That's going to make a difference for them.
Well, speaking of making a difference, right? Here's the headline. It says, see who'd be eligible for coronavirus checks under the Senate GOP plan, right? Because everybody was talking about, this money that was going to be given out, right? $1,000, and I think some people thought $1,000 a month. They were equating what was being discussed to the universal basic income plan that what's his name, Yang had spoken about. I saw people posting that they were going to take their money and invest in real estate and do all kinds of other things, right? So here's
that kills you every time you say it. You just love saying that too.
It does, Diane, because you know what it does? It reminds me of when my kids were little, right? And they would say, I want $1 gazillion, Daddy. Because they were so disconnected with reality, right? So anyway, here's what it says. It says the plan unveiled Thursday night by Senate Republicans to send direct cash payments to help Americans hurt by the coronavirus pandemic would send checks of up to $1,200 per person in a one-time payment. And payments would be based on income. So up to and one time. It says, under the plan, the details of which were revealed on the Senate floor by Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, individuals making up to $75,000 annually would be eligible for a $1,200 check from the federal government. Cash would be delivered in a one-time payment. President Donald Trump and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin had in recent days pushed the Americans to get two payments. But McConnell saying one-time payment. Says married couples who file their taxes jointly would have to make less than $150,000 to qualify for their payments, which would be $2,400. From there, according to McConnell's proposal, the payments would decrease for individuals. The sum of the payment would fall by $5 for each $100 earned over $75,000. Says the payments would phase out entirely for individuals making more than $99,000 annually, meaning people who make more than that would not get any money from the government, according to the proposal. Right? It said for married couples earning more than $150,000, the payment would also decline gradually, and it would phase out completely for couples making more than $198,000, according to the plan. The checks, however, would reduce to $600 or $1,200 for married couples for taxpayers who have little or no income tax liability, but have at least $2,500 in qualifying income, according to a GOP summary of the plan. So that is the proposal. And so for all of you folks who were thinking that you were going to just start raking in $1,000 a month and that you were going to invest in the real estate market.
Well, you could invest in the real estate market. You
Right?
don't necessarily have to buy property. You could
Diane.
invest in tax liens with $1,000 and make money.
Diane. So here's what I would say, Diane, but what I'm going to say is this. For folks who take their tax returns and buy flat screen TVs, right, they don't have the discipline to now take this $1,000 or less and invest it in something else. They just may buy a bigger TV.
Well, let's encourage people to save, help build up that emergency fund, or buy what you necessarily need and save the rest. Because, like you said, it's a one-time thing. Don't go out there and splurge. You don't need a damn TV.
Maybe they need maybe they need a smart TV so they can connect to Pornhub straight to the 65-inch joint. Right? Throw away the laptop. Hey, go big time. I'm sorry, Diane. I can't.
Yeah, you digressed.
I did digress. What else is going on?
Let me see what else. Then there was another guy. There was a guy with a huge, you know what, and they had a prank photo meme of him, and it was a photo of a porn star, And now he's starting to boost, get all of these sales money. Well, not because people are using his face and body on different merchandise like T-shirts and stuff like that. And the owner of the picture said he took the picture back in, let me see, 2009. But since then, the person has passed away, who's the actual photo of. And he wants whoever it is that's out there putting his face on T-shirts and stuff like that to give him money to the family.
Wait a minute.
And his porn name was Wood.
Oh, gosh. Look, I don't even know what to say about that, Diane. So you asking whether or not he's entitled to royalties or something? I don't know.
Absolutely. You can't use his face for something else to make money off of it. Who does that? I mean, people do it, but that's not right. So his family should get the royalties to that.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. What do you think about Murphy delaying the special election and school board elections to May and making them vote by mail only? I see trouble.
It's a setup. They're doing it as a setup because they want to, tamper with. This is the best way for them to tamper with the election is moving the date.
Well, not only moving the date, Diane, but going to vote by mail. Do you understand what I'm saying? See, when you go to vote by, because when you go to vote by mail, it literally all becomes about data. See, if I'm running a campaign if I'm running an insurgent campaign, the way you run an insurgent campaign is grassroots, on the ground, knocking on doors, getting out votes, right? The establishment usually has all the data. They have the mailing lists, they have the phone call lists, they have all of those things. And so now, if you shift the battlefield from the neighborhoods and door knocking, right? You change the landscape of the battle, and it becomes about about phone calls, right? And it becomes about emails. Then they win because to make phone calls, you're going to need either volunteers to make those phone calls. You're going to have to be able to capture that data, do all those kinds of things. And somebody was telling me that some campaigns, they called me last night. They said some establishment campaigns are actually out looking right now for phone bankers to work from home. I forgot what they said. Did they say not $1 a call, but whatever the number was, like piecework, right? For you to make these calls, and then you'll get paid to do it. So there are going to be a lot of people. One man's trash is another man's treasure, right?
Yeah.
That is the theme.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to need them to pay me my money up front because I can make a lot of phone calls. I will bankrupt them.
So I don't know who the campaigns are that are doing it, but there are campaigns that are going to be looking for people, and there are people who are looking to make extra money, right? So there's going to be a marriage made in heaven there. And again, the campaigns that have the most money are going to be the campaigns that win this battle because you've changed the landscape. So, I'm a little bit concerned about it.
But if they do that, they also need to change the monitoring system because I have seen on my level election ballots that have come through the mail-in ballots that have been thrown out. So there has to be some type of a new checks and balance that's put in place by the Board of Elections in every state that decides to do this.
Right. Read a little bit of this. It says, New Jersey will delay the spring school board election, school board and special elections until May 12th, and will require them to be conducted exclusively by mail, Governor Murphy said Thursday. But Murphy has not yet decided what to do about the major upcoming election, the June 2nd primary that includes the presidential, Senate, congressional races, which typically have high turnout and could take place as state residents continue to face strict measures to combat the coronavirus epidemic. We will not hesitate to act if this emergency requires us to do so, Murphy said at his daily coronavirus briefing, where he announced that he signed an executive order changing the election date and procedures. Atlantic special election on changing its form of government, and a special election in West Amwell Township, both scheduled for March 31st, will instead be held May 12th. So here's the thing, right? You can't change the election or decide to change it based on, or you shouldn't, based on politics, right? So in reading some of this, Diane, and now part of it, I'm sure, has to do with the fact that this March 31st election is just about a week and a half away. And so looking at all the data they're looking at, they realize that they may be further shutting down the state. So they're taking preemptive measures and moving it now. And he's saying, well, the other election is not until June 2nd. Right? So we have to look at all the data. We have to see where the spread is, where the curves are, how we're doing to make some kind of decision. But here's my challenge with this. You have the Democratic Party, right? You got the governor, right, who essentially is the top of the ticket of the New Jersey Democratic Party, who has all the data, who has a vested interest June 2nd primary, right? And so all of the people who may be running insurgent campaigns, they don't have the data. And so if he's making a decision, one, based on health and safety, but secondly, on vulnerability of candidates who are running, right? And then deciding whether or not, from a political advantage standpoint, it makes sense to move or not, I think that's problematic. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, Diane? So it's not simply that he's looking and saying, well, because I'm an insider, right, in terms of politics. So I know that they're looking at all of this. And so one is, and I don't even know, when I say one, I'm not saying how they're prioritizing it, because they may be prioritizing when the campaign Save the People, as opposed to save the people and then try to win the campaign. So however they're prioritizing it, which probably, because a lot of them are just scoundrels, is we got to focus on winning the campaign, right? And then there'll be some collateral damage in the middle of this, and then we'll recover, and then we'll all come back together. So his decision about moving the date and everything, I believe, will ultimately be about creating an advantage for the party incumbents.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, for all of the newbies who are not familiar with the system, they should be pushing back on this hard and loud. And if this does go through, they should be requiring that the VAN system that holds all the data, the phone numbers, the emails to all of the voted registered people in the state should have access to it free. Because that system is the system that really helps drive the campaigns, is having access to that information.
There's an article that came out of the, and I read the Root a lot. It says the coronavirus has exposed America's sickness of selfishness, right? And what it's talking about, it says, when you go into these stores and you look at the shelves emptied out, right? You see people hoarding. It shows us who we really are. Like, we want to be something different, right? We aspire to be something different, but the data, the truth of who we are, is coming out now. It's a very interesting article. I'm going to post it and ask you guys to read. I'll read a little bit of it for you. It says, when I was a little girl growing up in Jamaica, my school teachers frequently recited the phrase, "No man is an island, no man stands alone." The saying effectively transmitted to me and to my peers' childhood minds the message that we're all in this together, and that as humans, we need each other to survive, even though we reside in a country that was literally an island in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. 7 years later, as an adult living in the United States, has given me another kind of education, namely that this philosophy is not as widespread as my cultural upbringing may have led me to believe. In my time here, I've worked as a communications specialist for nonprofit organizations helping engendered support. Helping engender support for policies that benefit individual people and communities at large, like paid sick time, blah, blah, blah. She goes on and on and on. And it says, enter coronavirus, a disease which has brought into stark relief the deadly consequences of a social sickness. When news hit that the deathly and highly contagious virus had crossed the United States border, one upstanding citizen drove 300 miles across Tennessee and into Kentucky to buy all of the antibacterial wipes and hand sanitizers he could find in order to hoard and upsell them at horrendous prices to his fellow American stores, right? So that was the first instinct. It wasn't to try to figure out how to help. It was try to figure out how to capitalize. I don't think that is, I don't know that he is the exception. I think that he is the rule by and large, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I saw people in the stores buying up all the toilet tissue. Still, again, don't understand what that was about. Buying up all the toilet tissue, and just you've seen pictures of all the stuff that have shelves in grocery stores.
Well, wait a minute, Diane, you don't understand. So wait a minute. You've never been in the bathroom and looked over and there was no toilet paper? Your hubby used the last of the toilet paper, and you're in the bathroom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a panic that sets in.
Diane,
there's a panic that sets in. It's
okay.
Anxiety sets in. You're like, what the? Yeah. Or wait a minute.
You know what happens is you're trying to figure out, okay, where is it? Can I clench my booty cheeks together long enough to get either upstairs, downstairs, or 5 feet away to get to some tissue? Or you're screaming for somebody to hear you. Come get me. Bring me a roll of tissue. Okay, I understand.
There's a panic that sets in. Or when you have a roll, but you don't have enough. See? Right? And then you're trying to figure out.
You got to make it work.
You got to make it. How am I going to make this?
And not get your fingers wet. Ew.
Yeah, you know I got like 6 squares on this roll. What am I going to do? Hold on. Let's take this call. Hello, caller. Please go. Save us.
Hi, this is Lori Thomas.
Hey, Lori, how are you?
Pretty good.
Good. So, listen, I don't know if you've been tuning in.
I've been listening, yeah.
Yeah, so we're just talking about the run on toilet paper and the selfishness that has, become more and more apparent here in this country as we're trying to work our way through this coronavirus pandemic.
Well, I think we're suffering from 2 different kinds of problems. We're suffering from a knowledge deficit, and I talked about that yesterday, that what people need to know. But we're also suffering from a deficit of love. We don't love each other. I mean, many of us do. And I think church folk, for the most part, do better at this than a lot of other people, because they've had all this practice in praying for you to get well and so forth. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that since the dawn of civilization, the way you control people is by dividing and conquering. So it's every man for himself type of stuff, and making people suspect each other and fear each other and hate each other. I mean, that's just what the man does. What the man does to get you to fall into line. It's how that's how the powerful people have controlled the masses since the dawn of civilization. And by now we should know better.
That's interesting. That it's, but I think that this, I really believe that this pandemic is going to create a seismic shift in how we. I think that a lot of things are being exposed right now, that we have lived in. You know, we always talk here, Lori, about The Matrix, and I loved that movie because I think that it represented so much of reality, right? That there's this world that we don't want to acknowledge really exists, so we'd rather take this pill and just be plugged in. What do they say? Ignorance is bliss. Because
Well, that's the blue pill.
I'm sorry.
I said that's taking the blue pill.
That's taking the blue pill, and I
give me some more of them red pills.
And I think that people are. I think that right now the coronavirus is forcing the red pill down a lot of people's throats, and whether or not they'll swallow remains to be seen. But there is a reality that exists out here that is far different from what the oligarchs would like us to believe.
Well, if we look at history, it's very easy for lessons like this, lessons from something like this to go completely unlearned. And for example, the Great Pandemic at the end of World War I, people almost forgot about it. I mean, we had towns where there were so many deaths that they had mass graves. I mean, I saw something about some town, I think it was in Pennsylvania, where they just did ground penetrating radar, and they found, oh yeah, there's a huge mass grave that was even unmarked. But I mean, it affected people individually. Like my husband's grandmother died in the epidemic. She lived in outside of Philadelphia, and Philadelphia was really badly hit in the big flu epidemic because the city fathers didn't understand, or they kept on with this planned Liberty Bond drive because it was in the middle of World War I. So they had people pouring into the streets in this big gathering to raise money for the war. And as a result, Philadelphia was terribly, terribly hit by the pandemic. Young women, especially pregnant women, were just devastated. I mean, a lot of women had miscarriages, and a lot of them died. And as I said, my husband's grandmother died in this, and she left young children motherless. So this had a terrible effect on the family. So, but then a few years later, the war is over, and everybody wants to forget. So it's really easy for people to forget things. So we really have to, and we can't expect people to learn from this. We have to use this as a teachable moment. And we have to use it as a touchstone and teach on the basis of this. Don't just expect people to learn from experience, because people don't learn from experience. Teachers can use people's experience to teach them lessons, but a lot of people just, I mean, they don't, that was bad, and they pick up and move on.
Well, but it's not, and I agree with you, but, in our classroom, we're not taught about these things. We're not conditioned to be sensitive to history like this.
Right.
Right. And I think that it's intentional, right? Again.
Oh, I know it's intentional.
Ignorance
I
is
know
bliss.
it's intentional.
Yeah.
I wrote a book about why it's intentional.
You know what? I want to get to that because we talked after yesterday's show, and I'll tell you, so many people all night. My phone was going off. People saying that they got so much out of yesterday's show, and I mentioned that. So guys, on the phone we have Lori Endicott Thomas, who is the author of No More Measles, but not only the author of No More Measles, but there's several other books that you've authored.
Yes, thank you. This one is called Not Trivial, and it's about, the subtitle is How Studying the Traditional Liberal Arts Can Set You Free. because I wanted to explain that there's a certain kind of education that prepares you for freedom, and there's a certain kind of education that prepares you for slavery. And to understand this, it really helps to have a little bit of a classical education. A classical education means knowing about the history and literature, and preferably even the language of the ancient Mediterranean world, the Greek and ancient Greece and the Roman Empire and so forth. Now, the Roman Empire depended very heavily on slave labor. They had major wars that were called the servile wars, that were slave uprisings. And the most famous one is the Third Servile War, in which the rebellion was led by a former gladiator named Spartacus, which is why leftists from then till now have regarded Spartacus as a hero. Now, we don't really know much about him, but he was a gladiator, so he had been trained in combat skills, and then he was able to lead this uprising that shook Rome to its very foundations. So and I strongly recommend the movie Spartacus that Kirk Douglas was in. It's a terrific movie. So anyway, and the movie Spartacus was written by somebody who had been blacklisted in the Hollywood blacklist era. So it kind of ties into into 20th century American politics as well. Mm-hmm. So anyway, in ancient Rome, a lot of the work was done by enslaved people, and sometimes they had slaves serving as people that we would think of as white-collar professionals today. They had slaves who were working as accountants. They had slaves who were working as physicians. So you can have people work in these fancy white-collar jobs without really being free. And by free, I mean able to determine their own lives and to have a voice in the government that governs them. So in order to really have a voice and to take a meaningful role in making the decisions that affect you, you need to have a certain kind of education. And that certain kind of education was largely developed in ancient Athens, which also developed the concept of democracy. Now, the word democracy originally meant mob rule, and it was originally a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It was considered a bad thing. But we realize now that democracy is a good thing. But in order for it to work, you also have to have proper respect for educated people, for example, and you have to have checks and balances within the government. You have to have a constitutional democracy. You can't just have a limit of people mobbing and just you can't have chaos.
Right.
Yeah, you have to have the rule of law. Otherwise, you've got lynchings and so forth, which is not good.
We talked about that the other day on the show, where I was explaining the difference or the need for a republic, right? Because we are a republic, and there lies the rule of law, because to just have a simple democracy would then say that the majority rules or mob rules would lead to chaos. So you do have to have that balance, correct?
Well, the important thing to understand is the importance of scale. So if you have a very small society, like the hunter-gatherer societies, or more properly called foraging systems, they didn't have any formal ruling structure. Now, I'm writing a book now which I'll explain this in more detail. But the really small groups, like the bands of hunter-gatherers, they had no formal authority structure, and they had no permanent rulership. They would make decisions collectively, and women had an important voice in what was going to happen and what was going to be done. So when you had very small scale societies, you had, if that when that was all there was, you had democracy everywhere. It was taken for granted, I think. It was only after societies get to a large enough scale that you start to have some sort of separate government. So because you have essentially a division of labor. So you have some people that are making decisions on behalf of the group. Now the question is, who gets to make decisions and enforce those decisions on the group as a whole? Should it be somebody who was chosen by the gods, or is a god himself? That was the old-fashioned way. They regarded the Egyptian pharaohs and the Japanese emperors. They were regarded as living gods. Well, that obviously has its drawbacks. In Christianity, they decided that the king was ruled by divine right. It was the God. That God had decided that this person was going to rule, and they were anointed with oil as part of their coronation ceremony. And that's a ritual that goes back to ancient Egypt, because the word Messiah comes from the Egyptian word for crocodile. Crocodile was a sacred animal. They used fat from the holy crocodile as part of the coronation ritual for an Egyptian pharaoh. So the word Messiah meant the proper king. So the medieval Christian idea was that the king was God's representative on earth. But we don't accept that now. We want a people who make the decisions on behalf of everybody to be chosen by the people and answer to the people. So the question is, you can have a democracy in a large-scale society as long as the people who are ruling, the people who are in the government, are doing what the people want them to do. So the question of whether you can have a republic, which just means there's no king, a government that doesn't have a king. But the question is it doing the will of the people or not? And most Americans, increasingly over the past few decades, have become convinced that the government is going in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
So Lori, I have a question. Do you think this is the opportune time for people to really have an anarchy with government based on what's happening, and literally, I don't know, physically go in and drag them out of these offices and say enough is enough and we're done with you?
Well, we don't. The thing is, and that the book that I'm writing now is going to be called The Game of Politics, and it's not done yet. But the idea that there are 4 different kinds of power in any large-scale society. This is an idea that goes back to the Indian scriptures called the Vedas, and they explain this. And the system of the power structure within a society that they describe in these documents that are several thousand years old corresponds very precisely to modern sociological theory. So I gave a paper on this to the Bertrand Russell Society a couple of years ago, and I said to the philosophers there, I said, well, I'm sorry about this. I apologize in advance that after you listen to this presentation, every political discussion you're going to hear from here on out is going to sound stupid to you. And they laughed, and they said, oh, Laurie, we're philosophy professors. We teach courses on political philosophy. We already feel that way. You can't make it worse. And then I made it worse, because I told them this framework for analysis from ancient India. Now, there's the Vedas that said that there are 4 different kinds of people. Each of those kinds of people has a different set of responsibilities and powers. And this set of rules and responsibilities and powers and so forth is called their dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A. So the rulers of a society, they was called the kshatriya, which meant ruler. Sometimes it's called the warrior caste. That's not a correct translation. It's really the rulers. They have the responsibility to protect and defend, and to make sure that justice is served. So, if you want to know what a good kshatriya is supposed to do, read your Bible. They talk about how the pharaoh was supposed to collect up the surplus during the years of good harvest, save it up, and give it, and then distribute it to the hungry during the lean years. That's one of the things that a king is supposed to do. So, tax the rich and feed the poor. That's one of the things that a government is supposed to do, according to the Bible. So the other thing is to defend the country in time of war, and to protect and to maintain law and order in time of peace. Those are other things that the rulers are supposed to do. And for this reason, they have the power to use force, and they are the only ones who are allowed to use violence, according to the Dharma theory. So this is why Gandhi understood this. So his concept of nonviolence was that only the rulers are allowed to use violence, therefore ordinary people are not. But we don't need to, because we have the power of number. We can simply not cooperate with injustice.
And how would what would that form of not cooperating be like? Because my thing is, if you keep raising my taxes, there needs to be an anarchy, and we put all our money into a tax fund, and we stop giving it to the government until they transform to do what we need them to do. What based on your research, what have you seen over the centuries that has been done that effectively worked? I mean, we've had the Tea Party, and they threw the tea out in Boston Harbor. I mean, there's various different things in different parts of history, but what do you think can be repeated then or a part of that can help us now? Because I think that's where a lot of people are. They're kind of stuck as to, we have numbers, we're not voting, but we feel like we're still stuck. And some of us are voting and still feel stuck because things are not transitioning properly the way that they should be.
Well, there's as I said, there's four kinds of power in society. There's the power of force, which governments have, and you will never be able to overthrow a government by force unless that government is on the ropes because of unless it's become weak in some way. The Russian Revolution was able to succeed because the Tsar had lost military power. He couldn't put down a rebellion. You know, his armies were in a state of mutiny. They were weakened by the war, and the ones that were still alive were like, screw him, you know. So the power of number, power of force. The other two kinds of power are wealth, and that's what the rich people have. That's the power to hire and fire. So the power, the ruler can say, "Do what I tell you, or I'll have you punished." The wealthy people say, "If you do as I ask, I'll pay you." And that's a completely different kind of power. So the other kind of power, the first kind of power, which the Vedas said was most important, was the power of knowledge and wisdom. So the idea is that when you have someone with the power of knowledge and wisdom, like Dr. King, can teach people how to use their power of number productively to achieve justice. So that's in my book, Don't Feed the Narcissists. I talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, how that the power of knowledge and help the people with the power of number behave in such a way that they achieve the political goal. So we need to mobilize the power of number, but we need the power of wisdom. We need the teachers and preachers, and I mean, they don't necessarily have to be religion preachers. They can be, people who are teaching what is right and what is good from whatever perspective. We need them to organize and mobilize the population, and once that happens, the people are unstoppable.
Right. So listen, Lori. Yesterday, we were talking about. I'm going to make a hard switch here. Yesterday, we were talking about a host of things, and some of it led into sources that we should listen to, sources that we should discount. There are a lot of folks now who are searching for truth as we make our way through this coronavirus pandemic. And then there were some articles I sent you yesterday because I too am trying to find my bearings, right? Because there's a lot of information that's coming from everywhere, and I'm trying to read as much as I can, and I am making every effort, guys, to leverage this platform to try to vet content information and deliver the truth about what's going on.
Right.
So there was the email I sent you it said regarding number 2 document, or doc number 2, and it was talking about vaccines. And the summary of this was, it says summary of key ideas, vaccine injury in African American community. And then it gave several points. Point number 1, civil engineers, not vaccines, produced the large gains in life expectancy over the 20th century. The number 2 issue.
That's misleading.
Right. So I'm just going to read through them, right?
Yeah.
and then I want you to respond to them, because this is the kind of information that I would get from somebody, right? And it doesn't matter who I got this from, but this is the kind of information that's out there. And if I don't have a resource to be able to share this with, to be able to kind of ferret through it to find what's true, what's not true in it, then I might just take it and become the purveyor of propaganda. And that's what we avoid here. So it says here, so let's deal with the first thing that you said was misleading. So 1, it says here, civil engineers, not vaccines, produced the large gains in life expectancy over the 20th century.
Let's back.
Okay.
What was it that depopulated the Americas and in the Columbian era? Columbus and his crew came over, and all of a sudden the Americas, the populations were decimated. That's smallpox. So and smallpox was the number 1 cause of death in Europe at the dawn of the 18th century. It was the number 1 cause of death. It was less of a problem in Africa and in the Ottoman Empire than in Europe and the Americas. And the reason for this is because Africans had a technology that the Europeans did not. And this became known. A few people, one man in Massachusetts, a woman from Britain, learned about this. The man was Cotton Mather. He was a Puritan minister in Boston, and his congregation had given him a slave. So yes, there was slavery in Massachusetts, and so they'd given him a slave, and this man's slave name was Onesimus. I don't know what his real name would have been. Onesimus was the name of somebody from the Bible who ran slavery, but then thought better of it, came back to his master, which it's kind of a sickening story. Anyway, this man, this Onesimus, I don't know what his real name was the single most important person in the history of medicine in the Americas, because Cotton Mather said to him, I see all these people from Africa who have these beautiful smooth faces. Don't you get smallpox in Africa? Because, in Europe, everybody would get it in childhood practically, and a lot of people would die, and the rest would be left with horrible scars on their face. And in the Americas, it was more of an epidemic disease that it would come through once every 20 years or so. But this African man said, well, I took the smallpox when I was 8 years old. And Cotton Mather said, what do you mean you took the smallpox? And he said, well, when smallpox came to the village, they scratched the arm of somebody, they scratched a blister from somebody who had it, scratched it into my arm, and I had one real bad sore on my arm, and from then on, you're immune. So that was the first immunization. So it's African technology. Immunization is African technology. And people who were saying that immunization is somehow foreign to the African experience or that it's bad for African people in general, they need to learn some Black history. So this innovation was controversial at the time because it's kind of dangerous. I mean, if somebody had syphilis and you mistook it for smallpox, you could spread syphilis that way.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a big debate about whether it should be done and stuff. And by the time of the American Revolution, most of the British troops that were coming over were already immune to smallpox, and they could get this procedure called variolation, because variola means real smallpox. So they could have this done. Well, the American Continental Army were all susceptible to smallpox, and there was a terrible outbreak of smallpox during the Battle of Quebec. That's why the United States and Canada are separate countries to this day, because the Continental Army was destroyed by smallpox during the Battle of Quebec. Their commanding officer was killed. Their numbers were greatly reduced. I mean, a lot of them died, and the rest were too sick to fight. So the Benjamin Franklin, who had lost his son to smallpox because he'd refused to have him vaccinated in the early days, variolated rather. So he and Benjamin Rush and John Morgan all said to George Washington, "You should have this procedure done on everybody entering the Continental Army." So Washington said, "Okay, yeah, I'll do this." This was a very risky decision, because that meant that his new recruits were going to be unfit for service for a couple weeks while they recovered from this variolation procedure. But he set this up, and now it was the single most strategic decision that Washington made in the war. It had a great deal to do with the fact that the United States eventually won the war. So people who think that vaccination or immunization is somehow un-American or somehow un-African, they just don't know their history. Now, after in 1796, there was a doctor in Britain who realized you could get the same effect of variolation cowpox instead of smallpox. Cowpox is something you catch from cows, and milkmaids, dairy workers, they would catch it. So they always have these beautiful faces, but when they talk about a milkmaid's complexion, that's what they mean. But they didn't have all these pockmarks from the smallpox. So he started using smallpox instead of smallpox, and that was in 1796, and that's when the population boom started. So when they started using this to wipe out smallpox, that's when the world population really started to climb. So that people saying that civil engineers had nothing to do with that. That was vaccination.
So when there's this conversation around vaccines, immunization, and especially in the Black community, when there's talk about linkage between autism and vaccinations and immunization, and this drive to push people away from being vaccinated because of this thought of a conspiracy somehow between a pharmaceutical company and government and the adverse effect in the Black community, and then parents now are getting mixed messages. What should guide them?
Okay, first of all, you never hear this kind of stuff about how the pharmaceutical industry is controlling the vaccine. You never hear that from people who read the business press, because they know that vaccines are a tiny, tiny portion of the overall market for pharmaceuticals. And for the routine vaccinations, the margins are big. So it's for most of the routine vaccinations. It's not a big moneymaker for pharma. It's not something that, if people in pharma are sitting around trying to figure out how to make money, they're not talking vaccines. And they're not talking about anti-infectives in general, because it's just that's why we have very, very little in the way of developing new antibiotics and so forth. So they don't. The reason we don't have a Lyme disease vaccine is because there is a Lyme disease vaccine, and it works and it's safe, but it's not. It didn't make the cut for the advisory committee on immunization practices, which is this committee for the everybody. So because it's not on that, because the Lyme disease vaccine was not on that list, it wasn't protected by the vaccine court, which meant that if the routine vaccines, there's a tax on them, and the money that's collected from that tax is then used to reimburse people who really were injured by vaccines. And the procedure to get your reimbursement is very simple. You don't even need a lawyer. They have special masters, the vaccine court. You just make your claim, and if you have one of the common injuries, they just pay you, no questions asked. It's very simple. And no lawyers are getting rich on this, which irritates a lot of lawyers. But the Lyme disease vaccine was not covered by this because it didn't have that special protected status. So therefore, the company that had the vaccine, they didn't even bother to make it. So it was an economic decision on it. It was just not worthwhile to sell to them. It was too much exposure, not enough profit margin.
So I'm just going to read this other headline because so it says in the document that I sent you, it says none of the vaccines on schedule were tested against an inert saline placebo in clinical trials. And it goes on to say double-blind randomized controlled trials are the gold standard, quote, in evidence-based medicine. The Informed Consent Action Network 2018 reviewed the FDA application for all of the vaccines currently on the national schedule and discovered that none of them use the inert saline placebo. And it says in 2013, the Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine, studied the entire childhood immunization schedule and stated, quote, no studies have compared the differences in health outcomes between entirely immunized populations of children and fully immunized children. Furthermore, studies designed to examine the long-term of the cumulative number of vaccines have not been conducted.
Okay. The people who go on and on about that, they tip their hand right away. They don't know how research is done.
How so? Why would you say that?
Okay. During World War II, a lot of people were harmed by these horrific experiments that were done at concentration camps. Like by Dr. Mengele and so forth. They were doing these terrible, terrible experiments on concentration camp prisoners. So they had this trial at Nuremberg called the Doctor's Trial. And it dealt with all of this question of research ethics. And you shouldn't have done these bad things. And the defense that the Nazi doctors gave at the Nuremberg trial was, oh yeah, you Americans do the same thing. You do things on your prisoners. You do similar bad things on your prisoners. And this was a shocking it was a shocking thing to hear, but it was true. American prisoners had been used in all sorts of unethical experiments. There was no protection for people who took part in the there was no protection for research subjects. So this created shockwaves throughout the medical profession. And a few years later, the World Medical Association came out with what was called the Declaration of Helsinki. And it laid out a set of rules that was based on the conclusions of the doctor's trial in Nuremberg. The court came up with some basic guidelines. The World Medical Association made that into the Declaration of Helsinki, and it was a set of guidelines for what you can and cannot do to research subjects. And this Declaration of Helsinki is a declaration of principles, but then it was then coded to law in many different countries. So many of the things that are in the Declaration of Helsinki are now a matter of federal law or law in different countries. So if you want to do research that involves human subjects nowadays, you have to follow certain kind of rules. And one of them is that you cannot expose people to harm. You cannot do something that's risky to their health just to prove a point. So when you are doing a research on a vaccine, you cannot leave a child vulnerable to a deadly disease just to see if the additives in the vaccine or whatever were causing some sort of harm. You can't do that because by now they're so sure of the safety of a lot of things that it would be unconscionable to expose people to that kind of risk. So there are a lot of studies that would be illegal. And the fact that people are saying, "Oh, they're not doing this kind of study," yeah, because it would be illegal.
But the information that's out there right now is that these clinical trials and all the things that are happening is just this wild west, that there are no regulations, that people are in fact being used as guinea pigs, and some of the things that we see, especially in the African American community, are a result of folks putting people in harm's way as they try to find vaccines or workable vaccines and things like that. But you're saying that that's not happening.
It's not supposed to be happening anymore. And if it's not happening in, I mean, if it were happening in pharma, FDA would shut them down, because before you do a study that involves human beings, you have to have a protocol, and you have to have institutional review boards or institutional ethics or an independent ethics committee. So you have to have some sort of committee that has nothing to do with your company, nothing to do with your institution. Look at what you're planning to do to subjects, and then they get their permission. So they look at the law, they look at ethical concerns and so forth, and until you get approval, you can't do that. So a lot of things that people are talking about are things that happened like 15, 20, 50 years ago. That's not what's going on now. And nowadays there's all sorts of protections that are built into these things. So a lot of times people are saying, well, they're not doing this kind of study. Sometimes the study that would give people a placebo instead of a real treatment would be you can't just let people be at risk of harm or death just to prove a point. That's one of the basic rules in medical research ethics. And the other is that you have to get informed consent. And now people go to great lengths to get informed consent from the subjects, or if it involves children, from their parents or guardians.
So I have a question, Lori. How do people, especially Black Americans, decipher through all of the noise, filter through the noise to figure out what to listen to and what not to listen to in regards to immunizations? There have been things, and you said it, there are things that's happened maybe 40, 60 years ago. We had the Tuskegee Airmen that were tested on. We've had other situations.
It wasn't the Tuskegee Airmen. It was a Tuskegee experiment.
Experiment, I'm sorry. Experiment, yeah. Right, correct. And prisoners that we have heard of that have been used as experiments. How do people decipher as to what to do? Me, myself, if I had a child now, I would be very, I would be pulled back as to whether or not I would get my child immunized with the regular MMRs. But beyond that, I don't know if I would do that. I mean, for instance, my daughter's in her 20s now. When the HPV vaccine came out, my OBGYN was like, no, don't do that. You don't need that.
Why?
And she never had it, and she's never had a problem, and neither has my son. So my thing is, why? Because, and why would be, I'm taking my recommendations from my doctor who delivered me, delivered my cousins, delivered my daughter. So you're in his expertise and saying, look, there's not enough research at this particular time to just jump out there and say this is a vaccine that's necessary. Okay. So how do other parents decipher and filter and figure out like what's best for them and their family and their kids, as opposed to government saying this is what you got to do, this is mandatory for your kids to be in public schools? Like, what do you do? It's very difficult now.
And wait a minute, before you answer that question,
the government as such is not making that. It's not making that decision. I mean, it's not government bureaucrats who are making that decision. The people who are advising the There's an the advisory committee on immunization practice is medical experts. They're experts on all sorts of aspects of medicine, whether it's virology or public health and whatnot. And they're the ones who are making these advisory decisions. I mean, they're the ones who are advising the they're the ones who are making the recommendation. They're separate from the pharmaceutical companies. They're separate experts that are making this decision. And so, for example, the Gardasil vaccine is that's one of the ones that people get very upset about. That seems to have something to do with SDX. And the cervical cancers have long been suspected to be something that could be sexually transmitted. And the reason for this was that the high risk group was sex workers and the wives of men who used the services of sex workers. In contrast, nuns never seemed to get it. There was this study I think it was in Quebec, where they were looking at Roman Catholic nuns, and they were finding a lot of uterine cancer and endometrial cancer and so forth. Not a single case of cervical cancer among the nuns. They had pretty strong evidence that it was sexually transmitted. So the first suspect was herpes virus, because they knew that other kinds of herpes virus could cause cancer. Because the Epstein-Barr virus in somebody who has malaria could lead to Burkitt's lymphoma. That was a cancer of the jaw in children in Africa, and it was happening only in malarial areas. So it was the combination of that herpes virus plus the immune suppression from the malaria that was causing that. So the first suspect was herpes virus, but that didn't turn out to be. It turned out to be human papillomavirus, some strains of it. Now, papillomaviruses cause wart. So the viruses, there are some strains of human papillomavirus cause plantar warts, and some of them cause genital warts, and some of the ones that infect the genitals can then lead to cancer. So the person who figured this out was a man by the name of Harold Surhausen, and he won the Nobel Prize for that discovery. So he said that they've found cases of cervical cancer that weren't caused by HPV, but they've never managed to send them any samples that weren't HPV infected. But HPV is very common. The cancer-causing strains are very common, and most people do clear them. And the most dangerous ones, I think, are HPV 16 and HPV 18. I forget which one Henrietta Lacks had. Now, if you remember the story of Henrietta Lacks?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay. She had a cervical cancer that was an extremely aggressive cancer, and it killed her. And it had one of these HPV strains in it. So that's what killed her, was HPV. So if she had had Gardasil, she would never have gotten that cancer. But it wasn't around for her. It wasn't there to protect her. It's around to protect our daughters and our sons. So when people say, well, why should we do this and so forth? Well, just think of famous people who died of cancer of the tonsils. Graham Chapman from Monty Python died of cancer of the tonsils. Now, I don't know for sure that it was an HPV-caused cancer in his case, but a lot of the cancer of the tonsils can be HPV. So he could have, if that vaccine hadn't been available for him, could have prevented his death. Farrah Fawcett, the actress, she died of a cancer that is known to be linked to HPV. So, I mean, these are people that were widely loved celebrities and very fine people, and they died of this disease, which is now vaccine preventable. So, yeah, I would give it to my kid. I mean, I don't have children, but I would. I mean, if I had that. So if I had that opportunity.
So here's the issue, and we got about 10 minutes left. But I'd like to spend this time unpacking all of this, because there is this paranoia in our community right now. There's this trust for government, there's distrust for science, right? We see on the Republican side a distrust for science when it comes to global warming, a distrust on our side when it comes to medicine, and the articles that are all over the place. And like Diane said, where do you go? So this is still in the document that I sent you. Number 8, it said the CDC experimented on low-income Black and Hispanic infants without informing parents. It said beginning in 1989, the CDC. So this is an article. This is information that's being put out there.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Now that was okay. What we were dealing with then was a terrible outbreak of measles.
Okay.
Because, and the problem with measles is that if you have if a breastfed infant, they are going to be given some protection from their mother's, antibodies from their mother's milk. That will, that gives them some protection. This is called passive immunity. And then, so that will interfere with the effectiveness of the vaccine. So it's, the fact that they got their mother's antibodies killing the vaccine virus means that they're not going to get the effect of the vaccine. Now, this was a huge problem in Africa, where a lot of kids were getting measles and dying before the age of 9 months. But we don't vaccinate kids in the States against measles until an older age, because you get a better immune response when you're vaccinated at an older age. So, this is one of the things that the vaccine committee takes into account. It's like, what is the appropriate age for them to get this vaccine? And it's a balance of how much, protecting them as early as possible while getting the most bang for your buck in terms of, the most robust immune response from that vaccination. Now, I think it was the Edmondson Zagreb vaccine that they were using. They were using that in an African country because there were so many children dying of measles before the age of 9 months. And there were technical reasons for why they were using it there. And in one study, they were finding an excess of deaths amongst young girls, among baby girls or whatever. But, it was one study. It's what they call a safety signal. In other words, you see, oh, gee, this is a thing to look at. Signal is like you hear a noise in your house, right? And it could be somebody breaking in. The chances are it's just the heat kicking on. So if when you get a safety signal like that, and that it was a safety signal, then you have to look to see if it's a signal of something important. And it turns out that it wasn't. But the anti-vaccination people, they don't do their homework. They just find that there was some sort of controversy, and then they blow it up all out of proportion and don't give you to see, oh, okay, well, that's why they made that decision, and no, it wasn't harmful. None of the babies in Los Angeles were harmed by the decision.
So in actuality, it did happen, but you're saying they did it for the greater good.
Again, they weren't as meticulous back in like 1989. They weren't as meticulous about getting informed consent as they are now. The question there was, how much information did they give to the family?
Right.
Yeah. So nobody did anything that was like, it wasn't a reckless decision. It wasn't, these were harmed. And it wasn't like they were exposing people to danger for no good reason. That wasn't, what they were trying to do was stop a measles epidemic. And it's extremely important to prevent babies from getting measles. Because if you get measles before you are old enough for the measles vaccination, you can end up with a chronic measles virus infection in the brain. And this leads to a condition called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, in which the brain slowly turns to scar tissue. And when the child is about in their teens, they start losing their coordination. They start stumbling. And it's like, oh, gee, this kid's clumsy. And then it just relentlessly progresses to coma and death. And this SSPE will go away as soon as we eradicate these. Or we will stop getting new cases of SSPE as soon as we eradicate measles. So that's what the public health people who were using that strain of measles vaccine, they're trying to prevent death, and they did so.
So now,
and no babies were harmed by the choice of that versus, I forget what the name of the other measles vaccine. So
now,
the anti-vaxxers will try to turn this into a be afraid, be very afraid thing, but that's just because they hate vaccines.
Right. So when you look at this data, and I'm going to post this whole document for you all to look at. So when you look at it in the context that they give it to you, and then we go from that headline about the CDC experimenting on low-income Black and Hispanic infants without informing parents, gives this information. Now you provided some context for that, and then it goes to the next headline where it says autism rates are just the tip of the iceberg. And then it then goes and talks about Black infants are 2 times more likely to die as white infants. And then the next one is Black mothers die at more than 3 times the rate of white mothers. And then the next headline is we can and must stop these epidemics of chronic disease. And then the final thing here is 77% of parents have concerns about the bloated U.S. vaccine schedule. These are the CDC's own numbers.
Right. Well, they're trying to pretend that vaccination causes autism, and it doesn't. The other thing is that people who are worried about the bloated vaccine schedule, they've never worked in a pediatric intensive care unit.
Is there any research out there that really shows why there's such an uptick, especially in that Black American community, with autism? I mean, I have several friends who've had kids that are autistic. And I mean, I don't know if it's because of social media that we know about it more than before, but there is a big uptick in the Black and Latino communities for autism.
Well, I know what caused the autism epidemic. It was the DSM-4. It was the way that they drew the definitions for autism were broadened so much that the number of kids who fit that definition expanded. So a lot of kids, it used to be that if a child had what we think of as severe autism nowadays, if that child were evaluated by a doctor in 1950, for example, they'd have been given a diagnosis of mental retardation. Which is not. It doesn't make it. It's not a correct diagnosis. But then after or they might have given the diagnosis of childhood schizophrenia. So when they changed the diagnoses, the way they define these diagnoses, and the number of cases that fit into that category can go way up or way down, depending on they just get the person with the very same disease same condition could get a different diagnosis depending on how the diagnosis definition is written. So that's what caused the increase in autism. It wasn't a real increase in autism. And as for the vaccine schedule, I can tell you about a friend of mine. She woke up and she was 67 years old. Woke up and she was choking to death. The ambulance came. There was a doctor working on the ambulance, and he cut a tracheotomy on her and saved her life right then and there. Emergency tracheotomy on the child. That was from a condition called epiglottitis, and it's caused by a bacterium called FIV, and the incidence of FIV has gone down 99%. Came out with FIV vaccine. So these anti-vaxxers, they don't know stories like that.
No. All right, listen, we got Vincent Squirecart. Vincent, we're at 12 o'clock. Go ahead and make your comment.
Oh, isn't that a shame? No time for Vincent.
Oh, well, don't be all
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. I truly appreciate your information. You have a wealth of information. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I really enjoyed the show.
Wait, Vincent, one more time, Lori. How can people find you? It's your book. Where is it? And your website?
Well, I have a bunch of websites and so forth. If you want no more measles, go to NewJerseyRevolutionRadio.com or New Jersey. I forget what their website is. But New Jersey Revolution Radio is selling not no more measles as a fundraiser.
Well, you know what
so
I
if you
want to
want the
do,
ebook version.
Lori? We're going to put all of this, Diane, we're going to put it all in the thread. But, Lori, if you have time over the weekend, I want to sit, because I sent this to you in a note, that what I'd like to do, if you have the time and the desire, to have become a more integral part of what we're doing here, especially during this time, because we need to slow this thing down and have non-screaming matches about all of this so that people can absorb the information, right? And I'd like to create the necessary graphics here to promote and show where folks can get your information and read up on the books that you've put out, as well as New Jersey Revolution Radio, because I think that there's some synergy and some overlap that we need to look at, some networking that we need to do. And Brian and I talked about this too, so that people can navigate to places where folks are not, don't have ulterior motives, just simply want to get honest and truthful information out to people.
Right.
Because one of the things that I look at is when I look at those young people,
Radio, I won't see a sign of it. They get it. I get the money.
Yeah. So when we look at the pictures in Florida of those young people who are on the beach, right? I think that it is because it's scary, but it's the misinformation, right? It's the mixed messages that are leading to this, and so we need to, like I said, I want to use this platform really to be a beacon of truth. Of truth and honest information. So, whatever we need to do, Lori, to try to coax you to be a part of this, because I think this is going to last for quite a few months.
At least 7. They just started calling the National Guards in.
Yeah, and people are going to get scared, right? And fear is going to set in, and folks are going to be looking more and more, trying to figure out where to get honest information. And I want to let them know that, I'm committed, and I think you guys are too, Vincent, Diane, and Lori, to provide folks with honest information, as we work through these troubling times.
Oh, let's get that off the air.
What is this thing humans call fear?
False evidence appearing real.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody has been going off of, false evidence. Reading or getting into some headlines of some publication that somebody prints out on social media, from their little basement or their little tower of small information, and they print that out and people get scared and bothered. Oh, by the way, my grandson has autism, and I know a few other people who are classified as that, and she is right. And I believe it was 87, they changed the spectrum code. So people with small learning disabilities have been considered autistic. And you find that a lot in the black community. But when people start blaming certain things and then blaming the government and not looking for their actions and what they're causing, it raises a lot. Also, they just put out yesterday that the biggest catchers of the coronavirus are people between the ages of 20 and 44.
Yeah.
So they're also the largest carriers. But they've got the strongest. They're also the largest ones of getting or of recovering from it. It's those 60 and over who are dying. A majority of those 60 and over who are dying. So you have to be careful with the information that you're getting.
Yeah.
This is true.
All right, guys.
Well, I'll tell you this one thing.
Go ahead, Diane.
Your disinfectant wipes, those Lysol wipes, please stop flushing them down the toilet. You're clogging up the pipes, and plumbers will not come out. So don't do that.
You know what? You're 100%. I mean, we laugh at those things, but you're 100% right.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, thank you so very much, Lori. I can't thank you enough for the time you spend trying to educate me, Diane, and our audience. Guys, make sure you go. We're going to put the links in. Make sure you go to New Jersey Revolution Radio, download Lori's book, No More Measles. We're going to list the other books that she's authored, and you're working on another book right now.
Yeah, it's called The Game of Politics.
Yep. So we can't wait for that one to come out too. Guys, thank you all. Stay safe and stay in the house if you don't have to be out.
Yeah. Be safe, America.